where the secrets of the heart are written with ink and sealed with scandal. Welcome to channel, The Countess Chronicles.
What if I told you that the very thing you think will make you lovable is actually the barrier keeping love away? Sounds backwards, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to hear. We're all liars. Not the big, dramatic kind, the subtle, socially acceptable kind. We edit ourselves, curate our stories, hide our struggles, and present polished versions that look nothing like who we actually are. And we do it because we're terrified that our real selves aren't enough. But here's where it gets twisted. The love you receive for your fake self feels hollow, doesn't it? Like winning a prize with someone else's name on it. You're surrounded by people but completely alone because nobody actually knows you. They know the character you're playing. Now, imagine living that nightmare at the highest level. Picture a woman in 1847 London who built an entire false identity to win a duke's heart, fabricating noble lineage, memorizing lies, performing perfection every single moment. She got everything she wanted: the proposal, the love, the escape from poverty. Except she got it for someone who didn't exist. And when the truth finally exploded, his reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Not her, not society, not even you're going to see it coming. Because sometimes the biggest revelation isn't the lie itself, but what happens when two people finally stop pretending. This isn't just some period drama about fancy dresses and ballrooms. This is about the masks we all wear, the prison we build trying to be acceptable, and the terrifying freedom that comes when someone finally sees through our carefully constructed facades. See, Eleanor's story is your story. Maybe you're not lying about being nobility, but you're lying about something. We all are. Pretending you're fine when you're falling apart. Acting confident when you're terrified. Showing success while hiding failure. Building an Instagram-perfect life while drowning in reality. The methods change, but the pattern's the same. We're all performing, all hiding, all desperate to be loved, while convinced our authentic selves aren't lovable. And the cost? It's not just the exhaustion of maintaining the performance. It's the slow disappearance of who you actually are, buried under layers of who you think you should be. Eleanor almost lost herself completely in her deception. And the Duke, with all his wealth and power, was just as trapped, suffocating under the weight of expectations. Two people desperate for connection, building walls instead of bridges. But here's the part that'll mess with your head. When the truth finally came out, when the lies crumbled and the masks fell off, something unexpected happened. Not punishment, not rejection. Something that challenges everything we believe about vulnerability and authenticity. The Duke's reaction revealed a truth about human connection that most people spend their entire lives running from. And once you understand it, you can't go back to comfortable lies. This story will show you why the very thing you're hiding might be the only thing worth showing. Why perfect people are boring and broken people are beautiful. And how two imprisoned souls found freedom in the last place anyone would look. The terrifying honesty they'd been avoiding. Ready to have everything you believe about love and authenticity turned upside down? Let's dive into a story that started with a lie, but ended with a truth none of us saw coming. You know what's funny about lies? They don't feel like prison bars when you're building them. They feel like wings. That's exactly what Eleanor felt the moment she decided to reinvent herself at that grand ball in London, 1847. Standing there in a borrowed gown, watching the candlelight dance off crystal chandeliers, she made a choice that'd haunt her for months. She wasn't some poor merchant's daughter anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, She'd be Lady Eleanor Ashford, from a noble family that had fallen on hard times. The words slipped out so smoothly when the Duke of Rothshire asked about her lineage. It scared her how natural the deception felt. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that first lie. It's like that first sip of wine that seems harmless until you're 3 bottles deep. The Duke, with his sharp jawline and those eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets, leaned in closer. "Ashford, you say? I believe I knew your grandfather." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped, but she smiled. That practiced smile she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her cracked bedroom mirror. "Oh, he passed when I was quite young, Your Grace. Such a tragedy, really." She watched his face for any trace of suspicion, any hint that her carefully constructed enigma was crumbling. Instead, he nodded sympathetically, and she felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. Hope mixed with terror, like poison and honey in the same cup. The conspiracy she'd just launched wasn't against him. It was against her own future self, the one who'd have to keep this going. Here's what I've learned from watching people lie, and yeah, from my own stupid mistakes too. Lies are exactly like credit card debt. You swipe that card for something small, maybe a dinner you can't quite afford, and it feels almost victorious. I got away with it. But then comes another swipe, and another, and suddenly you're drowning in interest you never saw coming. Eleanor felt that rush when the Duke asked her to dance, when his hand touched hers, when he whispered that he'd like to see her again. "It worked!" her mind screamed. But somewhere deeper, in that place where truth lives, even when we're running from it, a different voice whispered, "Now you're gonna have to keep working it." I remember once lying about having read a book during a job interview, some classic I'd never touched. Got the job, felt brilliant, until my boss started referencing it in meetings. Spent 3 nights reading that damn thing cover to cover, terrified someone would catch my bluff. That's the hidden cost nobody mentions, the exhausting performance. Eleanor left that ball feeling like she'd won the lottery, but she couldn't sleep. She lay there replaying every word, every gesture, checking for cracks in her story. The vestiges of her old life, the small apartment, the struggling father, the truth, felt like ghosts haunting a house she'd abandoned. And here's the brutal part. She couldn't go back even if she wanted to. The moment you step into a lie, the door locks behind you. What she felt that night wasn't just relief or excitement. It was the beginning of a split. There's the person you are, and then there's the person you're pretending to be, and maintaining both is like trying to live in 2 houses at once. Eleanor had created Lady Ashford, but Lady Ashford needed constant feeding, constant attention, constant vigilance. Every moment of supposed triumph came with an undercurrent of dread. What if he asks about my estate? What if he wants to visit? What if someone who knew the real Ashfords shows up? These questions became her new companions, more faithful than any friend. The hidden nature of her deception meant she was utterly alone with it. Couldn't tell anyone, couldn't ask for help, couldn't even write it down in case someone found it. The Duke sent flowers the next morning. Beautiful white roses with a note. To the mysterious Lady Ashford, your company was the only genuine thing about last night's tedious affair. Eleanor held that note and felt something crack inside her. He'd used the word genuine. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, wanted to run to his estate and confess everything, wanted to burn the note and disappear. Instead, she did what liars do, she wrote back, deepening the deception, adding more details to her false history. Your Grace, the pleasure was entirely mine. Perhaps we might walk in Hyde Park this Thursday? See? That's how it works. Each lie gives birth to the next one, like some twisted family tree growing in the dark. Here's what nobody tells you about that moment when a lie succeeds. The victory is hollow. Eleanor had wanted connection, had wanted to be seen as worthy, had wanted escape from her predetermined path. But now she had something worse than rejection. She had conditional acceptance. The Duke liked her, maybe was even falling for her, but he liked a ghost. He liked someone who didn't exist. That first night, as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she dreamed of mirrors, hundreds of them, all reflecting different versions of herself, none of them real. The silence of her room felt suffocating, full of all the truths she couldn't speak. And somewhere in the shadows of that silence, she could feel it. The knowledge that she'd just traded one prison for another. But the invitations kept coming. The Duke was fascinated, wanted to know everything about her fallen family, her childhood, her dreams. And Eleanor? She was about to discover that the first lie is never the hardest one. It's all the lies that come after. The ones you need to keep the first one alive, that'll really test what you're made of. Because maintaining a false identity isn't just about remembering your story. It's about becoming someone else entirely, and hoping you can find your way back before you forget who you really were. The vestiges of Eleanor the merchant's daughter were already fading, and Lady Ashford was taking over, one careful word at a time. So here's where things get really messy. When you realize that one lie isn't enough. It's never enough. Eleanor discovered this brutal truth during their second meeting, when the Duke casually asked, "Tell me about your childhood estate. I imagine it was quite grand before the Troubles." And just like that, she had to build an entire world that never existed. She described rolling hills she'd never seen, servants she'd never employed, a library filled with books her family never owned. Each detail was another thread in a web that was getting more complex by the minute. The secret she was keeping wasn't just a simple deception anymore. It was becoming an alternate universe she had to memorize like scripture. You know what's exhausting? Trying to remember which version of a story you told to which person. The thing about lies is they breed. They multiply like rabbits in the dark. Eleanor started keeping a journal, not of her real thoughts, but of her fake history. Mother died when I was 12. Father lost the estate in a bad investment in 1839. We had a summer house in Bath. She'd study this fiction like students cram for exams, terrified of contradicting herself. I've seen people try to maintain elaborate lies, and it's like watching someone juggle while riding a unicycle. Impressive until everything crashes. The Duke would mention something she'd said last week, and she'd have to remember her exact words, the tone she'd used, even the emotion she'd faked. Every conversation became a test she hadn't studied for, and failure meant losing everything she'd built. Here's what really gets me about this phase: the mental exhaustion. Eleanor couldn't relax, not even for a second. At dinner parties, while everyone else enjoyed the food and conversation, she was running calculations in her head. Did I say my estate was in Yorkshire or Surrey? What year did I claim we lost it? Does this dress match the wealth level I've been portraying? The enigma she'd created was devouring her from the inside out. I once tried keeping a relatively small lie going for a few weeks. Told friends I was working on a big project when I was actually just struggling. The constant vigilance nearly broke me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, worried someone had asked a question I'd answered wrong. Now, multiply that by 1,000, and you've got Eleanor's reality. The Duke, bless him, was genuinely curious about her. He'd ask follow-up questions, want to hear stories about her supposed childhood, inquire about family traditions she'd never practiced. What was Christmas like at Ashford Manor? He asked one afternoon during a walk through Hyde Park. Eleanor painted a picture so vivid: the decorated tree in the main hall, the carolers, the feast, that even she almost believed it. But that's the dangerous part, isn't it? When you tell a story enough times, it starts feeling real. The codes of nobility she'd studied obsessively were becoming second nature. But at what cost? She was disappearing into her own fiction, like an actress who can't leave the stage even after the curtain falls. Then came the night that nearly unraveled everything. The Duke mentioned he'd be hosting a dinner party, and he wanted her to meet some old family friends, people who actually knew the aristocracy, who might have heard of the Ashfords. Eleanor's blood went cold. She smiled and said she'd be delighted, but inside, pure panic. She spent the next week researching, preparing, creating backstories for her backstories. It was like building a house of cards in a windstorm. Every new person she'd have to deceive was another layer of complexity, another potential source of discovery. The conspiracy she'd woven was getting so intricate that she could barely keep track of all the threads. Have you ever had that nightmare where you show up to an exam you didn't know about? That was her life now, every single day. The dinner party itself was psychological warfare. Eleanor sat there in her finest borrowed jewels, smile plastered on, while a countess discussed estates in Yorkshire, the exact region where Eleanor had claimed her family property was. "Oh, which part of Yorkshire, dear?" the woman asked innocently. Eleanor felt time slow down. She named a small village she'd read about in a book, held her breath, and waited. The countess nodded. "Lovely area. The moors are spectacular." Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief, but her hands shook so badly she had to hide them under the table. The hidden terror she felt in that moment, knowing that one wrong word could destroy everything, was unlike anything she'd experienced. It's like walking a tightrope over a canyon, except you also have to smile and make small talk while you're doing it. What people don't understand about sustained deception is the toll it takes on your soul. Eleanor stopped sleeping properly. She'd dream about being exposed, about the Duke's face turning from love to disgust, about being dragged out of ballrooms in shame. The disappearance of her true self was almost complete. She'd been Lady Ashford for so long that plain Eleanor felt like a stranger. I've learned this the hard way. When you're not authentic, you don't just lie to others. You start lying to yourself. You forget where the performance ends and reality begins. Eleanor would catch glimpses of herself in mirrors and not recognize the woman staring back. That's not metaphorical. She literally felt disconnected from her own reflection because she wasn't sure which version was real anymore. But here's the twisted thing. She was getting good at it. Too good. The lies came easier now, flowed like water, felt almost natural. And that terrified her more than anything else. Because if lying becomes easy, what does that say about who you're becoming? The Duke grew more attached with each meeting, more convinced he'd found someone special, someone real. And Eleanor? She was drowning in quicksand of her own making, every struggle pulling her deeper. The traces of truth were buried so far down, she wasn't sure she could dig them up, even if she tried. The conflict wasn't just between her and the Duke anymore. It was between her and herself, between who she was and who she was pretending to be. And the worst part? She was starting to forget which one she actually wanted to be. Here's where the story gets really cruel, when real feelings crash into fake foundations. Eleanor had been so focused on maintaining her lies that she didn't see it coming. She was falling in love with him. Not with the idea of being a duchess, not with the lifestyle or the security. With him, the actual person. It hit her during a quiet afternoon when the Duke shared something vulnerable, something he'd never told anyone. He talked about the loneliness of his position, how people only ever saw the title, never the man beneath it. And Eleanor felt her heart crack wide open, because she understood that feeling more than anyone could imagine. The irony was so painful, it was almost funny. Here were two people desperate to be truly known, and she'd built a wall of lies between them that made real connection impossible. The intimacy between them grew in ways that terrified her. He'd take her hand during walks and talk about his childhood fears, his dreams for the future, the weight of expectations he carried. Eleanor found herself genuinely caring about his happiness, wanting to comfort him, longing to share her own real struggles. But she couldn't. Every time she opened her mouth to offer authentic comfort, Lady Ashford's voice came out instead. It's like being trapped behind glass. You can see the person you love right there, but there's an invisible barrier you created yourself. I once dated someone during a period when I was pretending to be more successful than I was, more confident than I felt. The love they gave me felt hollow, like eating a beautiful cake that tastes like cardboard. Because it wasn't for me. It was for the character I was playing. The Duke started saying things that cut like knives wrapped in silk. "Eleanor, you're the first person who sees me, really sees me." And she'd smile while dying inside, because he didn't see her at all. He saw a carefully constructed illusion. One evening, he held her face in his hands and said, "I feel like I can tell you anything. There's no pretense with you, no games." The secret she carried in that moment felt like swallowing stones. How do you accept love that's meant for someone who doesn't exist? It's like winning a trophy with someone else's name engraved on it. The victory is meaningless because it's not really yours. The revelation that she desperately wanted to make stuck in her throat, trapped by fear and shame. Then came the night that changed everything. They were alone in his library, a real library, filled with books his family had collected for generations, and he kissed her. Not the polite, proper kiss of courtship, but something real, something that said, "I'm choosing you." And Eleanor kissed him back with all the genuine emotion she'd been holding hostage. For those few moments, she wasn't Lady Ashford. She was just Eleanor, kissing a man she loved, feeling something pure and true. But the moment it ended, reality crashed back in. He pulled away, looked into her eyes with such tenderness, and whispered, "I love you, Eleanor Ashford." Every syllable of that fake name was a nail in her coffin. He loved someone who didn't exist, and the real her, the one actually falling for him, was forbidden from being loved at all. The conflict inside her became unbearable. Part of her wanted to confess everything right then, to say, "My name isn't Ashford, I'm not nobility, but these feelings are real." But fear paralyzed her. What if he felt betrayed? What if he saw her confession not as honesty, but as another manipulation? What if the real Eleanor wasn't good enough for him? See, that's the truly tragic part. She'd started to believe her own lie. She'd convinced herself that plain Eleanor, the merchant's daughter, wasn't worthy of a duke's love. Only the fabricated aristocrat could deserve him. I've watched friends sabotage real connections because they didn't believe their authentic self was lovable enough. They'd rather lose love as their fake self than risk rejection as their real one. It's heartbreaking because it's a prison with unlocked doors. They just can't see it. The Duke started making plans for their future, He talked about introducing her to his family, about formal courtship, about marriage. Each word was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You can see the disaster coming, but can't stop it. Eleanor would lie awake at night, imagining two scenarios. In one, she confessed, and he forgave her, saw past the lies to the person beneath. In the other, the one that felt more realistic, he looked at her with disgust and sent her away. The mystery of which outcome would happen haunted her every waking moment. Have you ever loved someone knowing that letting them truly know you might destroy everything? It's like holding a bomb that'll explode, whether you keep gripping it or let it go. What destroyed her most was the purity of his love. He wasn't falling for her title or her supposed family connections. He already had all that. He was falling for the glimpses of real Eleanor that slipped through the cracks of her performance. When she laughed at his jokes without thinking, when she forgot to use proper formal language, when her genuine kindness showed through, those were the moments he loved most. And those were the moments that were actually real. It's like he was reaching through the lies to touch the truth, but he didn't know he was doing it. The disappearance of Lady Ashford was happening in reverse. The more he loved her, the more the real Eleanor emerged. But she was too terrified to let him see the complete picture. One night, after he'd shared his deepest fears with her, after they'd talked until dawn about everything and nothing, he said something that nearly broke her. "Promise me, you'll always be honest with me. That's all I ask." Eleanor promised, adding another lie to the mountain she'd built, feeling the weight of her deception like chains. The silence after that promise was deafening, full of everything she wanted to say, but couldn't. She loved him, truly, deeply, in a way that made her chest hurt and her hands shake. But the person he loved back was a ghost, a shadow, a beautiful lie. And the real question wasn't whether she could keep lying. It was whether she could survive being loved for someone she wasn't, while the person she actually was remained lost in the darkness, invisible and unloved. Because here's the terrible truth about masks. They protect you from rejection, but they also prevent you from ever being truly seen. And being loved without being known is the loneliest feeling in the world. You know that feeling when you're about to get caught? That electric panic that runs through your veins? Eleanor started noticing it in the small things. The way the Duke's eyes lingered on her face a second too long after she answered a question. The slight pause before he responded. The careful way he'd phrase certain inquiries. It started innocently enough. During a garden party, he mentioned a mutual friend of the Ashford family she'd never heard of. Watching her reaction like a hawk, she recovered quickly, claimed distant relation and foggy memory, but she saw it. That flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt? Curiosity? Suspicion? The codes of their interaction were changing, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. It's like when you're a kid and you've done something wrong, and your parent asks you a seemingly casual question that's actually a trap. The slip-ups started happening more frequently, little cracks in her carefully maintained facade. She mentioned a book that hadn't been published when she claimed to have read it at her childhood estate. She described a fashion trend from Paris that wouldn't have reached England when she said it did. She forgot which cousin she'd supposedly spent summers with and had to backtrack mid-sentence. Each mistake was small, barely noticeable to anyone else. But the Duke noticed everything. He'd tilt his head slightly, that gesture she'd grown to love, now filled with question marks. "Are you certain it was 1842, my dear?" he'd ask gently, and she'd feel her stomach drop. The traces of her deception were becoming visible like footprints in snow she couldn't erase fast enough. I remember once being close to getting caught in a lie about where I'd been the night before. Nothing scandalous, just embarrassing. My friend asked one simple question I hadn't prepared for, and I felt my brain freeze, scrambling for an answer that'd fit the story I'd told. That 3-second pause felt like 3 hours. Now imagine living that moment over and over, day after day. That was Eleanor's new reality. The Duke asked about her family's crest one afternoon, what animals were on it, what the Latin motto said. She'd researched dozens of noble families, but had never thought to fully invent a crest. She improvised, described something generic, and saw his eyebrows raise just slightly. Just enough to know he'd caught the hesitation. The hidden nature of his suspicion was almost worse than open accusation. She couldn't defend herself without confirming his doubts. Then came the question that nearly stopped her heart. They were having tea in his drawing room when he casually said, "I've been meaning to ask, didn't the Ashford estate burn down in 1835? I could swear I read something about it." Eleanor's hand froze halfway to her teacup. Her mind raced through every possibility. Agree and change her story? Deny and risk him having proof? She chose the middle path, the coward's way. Oh, you might be thinking of a different branch of the family. It's quite a common name in certain circles. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps," he said, but the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations. It's like that nightmare where you show up to school and suddenly realize you're naked. Except this was real, and there was nowhere to hide. The paranoia consumed her. Every invitation to his estate felt like a trap. Every introduction to one of his friends could be the person who'd expose her. She started making excuses to avoid certain social gatherings, claiming headaches and fatigue, which only made things worse because now he was concerned about her health. "You seem troubled lately, my dear," he said one evening, his hand covering hers. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" The way he emphasized something made her blood run cold. This was it. He was giving her a chance to confess, to come clean before he exposed her himself. But fear locked her throat shut. She just smiled and said she was fine, adding another lie to the mountain, watching his face close off just slightly. The enigma of what he actually knew versus what he suspected was driving her insane. The worst part? She started seeing suspicion even where it didn't exist. An innocent question about her preferences became an interrogation in her mind. A friendly inquiry about her past felt like a trap. She was becoming her own worst enemy, her guilt manifesting as paranoia, turning every interaction into a potential disaster. I've learned that when you're hiding something, you start seeing accusation in every glance, suspicion in every silence. It's exhausting. Eleanor couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't enjoy the moments they shared because she was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The disappearance of her peace of mind was complete. She existed in a constant state of low-level terror, like someone waiting for earthquake tremors to turn into the big one. It's exhausting. Eleanor couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't enjoy the moments they shared because she was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The disappearance of her peace of mind was complete. She existed in a constant state of low-level terror, like someone waiting for earthquake tremors to turn into the big one. One afternoon, everything came to a head. The Duke received a letter during their walk, read it quickly, and then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "How curious," he said slowly. "I've just received word from a colleague who's quite familiar with Yorkshire estates. He's never heard of the Ashford family losing their property to debt." Eleanor felt the world tilt. Her mouth went dry. Her carefully prepared responses evaporated. Perhaps he's not aware of all the families in the region, she stammered, hating how weak her voice sounded. The Duke folded the letter carefully, too carefully, and put it in his pocket. Perhaps, he repeated, and there was something in his tone. Disappointment? Sadness? Knowledge? The conflict between confronting her and pretending everything was fine was written all over his face. The tension became unbearable. Eleanor knew, she just knew, that he was on the verge of calling her out, of demanding the truth, of ending this charade once and for all. Part of her wanted him to do it, to rip off the bandage and end her suffering. But the larger part, the cowardly part, wanted to run, pack her bags, leave London, disappear before the revelation came. She started planning her escape in her mind, where she'd go, what she'd say, how she'd vanish before facing his judgment. It's like being in a car that's about to crash. You can see it happening, but you're frozen, unable to do anything but brace for impact. The secret she'd been guarding so desperately was rotting from the inside out, and she could smell its decay in every conversation. The question was no longer if he'd discover the truth, but when, and whether she'd have the courage to tell him herself or force him to uncover it on his own. The moment arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and it wasn't dramatic like she'd imagined. No grand confrontation, no public humiliation, just the two of them in his study, surrounded by books and fading sunlight. The Duke closed the door quietly, and Eleanor knew. She just knew. The way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression, it all screamed that the game was over. Eleanor, he said softly, and even her fake name sounded different in his mouth now, like he was tasting something bitter. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. The silence that followed was so heavy she could barely breathe. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading, and maybe, secretly, hoping for. The end of the conspiracy she'd built against herself. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Where do you even start? How do you confess to a lie that's become your entire life? Her voice cracked. She tried again. I'm not who you think I am. The words hung in the air like smoke, visible and choking. The Duke didn't move, didn't speak, just waited with that terrible patience that demanded more. So she gave him more. So nothing was real? He asked, and his voice was so quiet, so broken, that she started crying. Not delicate, ladylike tears, ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Because that question deserved an answer she couldn't give. Some of it was real. Her feelings were real. But how do you separate the truth from the lies when they've been twisted together so tightly? There's this moment right before consequences hit. Those few seconds where you've confessed but before the other person reacts, and it's an eternity of dying. Eleanor experienced every possible outcome in those seconds. She saw him calling the guards, having her arrested for fraud. She saw him laughing at her audacity. She saw him walking away without another word, erasing her from his life like chalk from a slate. What she didn't expect was tears. Not hers, his. A single tear rolled down the Duke's cheek, and he wiped it away almost angrily, like he resented his own emotion. I trusted you, he said, and those 4 words carried more weight than any accusation could. Trust, the thing she'd stolen from him through calculated deception, the foundation she'd poisoned with lies. The trace of what they'd had was right there in that tear, mourning its own death. I've had to confess hard truths to people I care about. And that moment, before they respond, you die 1,000 times. Your mind spirals through every worst-case scenario, every possible reaction, every way this could destroy what you've built. Eleanor stood there, hands shaking, mascara running, feeling more exposed than if she'd been physically naked. The Duke walked to the window, put his hands on the sill, stared out at his manicured gardens. The silence stretched so long she thought she might scream. Finally, without turning around, he asked the question that made her knees weak. "Did you ever care for me at all? Or was that part of the performance too?" The desperation in his voice, this powerful man, this Duke, reduced to asking if he'd been played for a fool, broke something in her. "Everything I felt for you was real," she choked out. "The lies were about who I was, not about how I felt. I know that doesn't make it better. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but please, please believe that." She moved toward him, instinctively reaching out, then stopped. She'd lost the right to touch him, to comfort him, to be anything to him. The enigma of their relationship was solved now, and the answer was uglier than either of them could have imagined. He turned to face her, and his expression was so complex, anger mixed with something that looked like concern, betrayal laced with what might have been lingering affection. "You made me love a ghost," he said simply. "How do I forgive that?" And Eleanor had no answer, because how do you forgive someone for stealing your reality? The tears kept coming, for both of them. She told him about the sleepless nights, the constant fear, the way she'd wanted to confess 100 times, but couldn't find the courage. She explained the poverty she was running from, the desperation that drove her to that first lie, the way it snowballed beyond her control. None of it was an excuse. She knew that. But maybe he'd understand the why, even if he couldn't forgive the what. The Duke listened, really listened, and she could see him processing, trying to reconcile the woman he'd known with this stranger telling him about her own conflict. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "That's the truth. I fell in love with you, and it made everything so much worse, because I knew I was building our relationship on sand." Then he said something that shocked her into silence. "Stop." He held up a hand, closed his eyes, took a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was something different there. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "There's something I need to tell you too," he said slowly. "Something I have been hiding." And Eleanor felt the world tilt again, because what could he possibly be hiding? What secret could match hers? The revelation she'd just made had opened a door, and she was about to discover that she wasn't the only one walking through it. Because sometimes the biggest twist isn't the confession itself. It's learning that you weren't the only one wearing a mask. Eleanor's mind went blank. "What?" The word came out barely above a whisper. The Duke moved away from the window, and for the first time since her confession, he looked almost vulnerable. Not angry, not cold, but human in a way she'd never seen before. "I need you to understand something," he began, his voice steady but soft. "Before I tell you this, I need you to know why I'm telling you." He sat down heavily in his leather chair, suddenly looking exhausted, like the weight of his title was physically crushing him. "When you walked into that ball months ago, do you know what I saw?" Eleanor shook her head, tears still streaming. "I saw someone trying, someone scared but brave enough to try anyway. And it reminded me of myself." The confession that followed was not what she expected. The Duke, this man of privilege and power, this pillar of society, had his own secret. "My title, my wealth, my entire life was built on an assumption everyone makes. That I want this." He laughed bitterly. I never wanted to be a duke, Eleanor. I wanted to be a composer. Music. That was my passion, my dream, my truth. He stood up, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out sheet after sheet of handwritten music. I've been composing in secret for years, creating pieces I'll never perform, writing symphonies that'll never be heard, because a duke doesn't do such frivolous things. A duke manages estates and attends parliament and marries appropriately and produces heirs. The way he said appropriately was loaded with a lifetime of resentment. Eleanor stared at him, trying to process this revelation. But you have everything. Why would you need to hide who you are? And he looked at her with such understanding, such recognition, that it hurt. Because everything means nothing when it's not yours to choose. I'm as trapped in my identity as you were in yours. Maybe more so, because I was born into my prison. He explained how every decision in his life had been made for him, how his father had literally beaten the music out of him as a child, calling it weakness, calling it shameful. By the time I inherited the title, I'd learned my lesson well. Be the Duke. Only the Duke. Nothing else matters. The hidden artist inside him had been suffocating for decades, and she could hear it in every word. Here's what struck Eleanor like lightning. They'd both been performing. She'd been pretending to be nobility, while he'd been pretending to be content with nobility. Two people wearing masks, dancing around each other, never showing their real faces. When you lied about your family, the Duke continued, part of me envied you. You had the courage to reinvent yourself, to reach for something you wanted. I have been too much of a coward to do the same. He picked up one of his compositions, stared at it like it was both precious and painful. Do you know what it's like to be loved for something you hate about yourself? Everyone respects the Duke of Rothshire. Nobody knows the man who writes music at 3 in the morning and cries because he'll never hear it played. The parallel between them was so perfect it was almost poetic. I've learned something about human nature over the years. We're all wearing masks, all hiding parts of ourselves we think are unacceptable. The difference is just in what we're hiding and why. Eleanor had hidden her poverty and common birth. The Duke had hidden his dreams and creative soul. Both had been terrified of rejection for their authentic selves. So when you ask me how I could forgive you, he said, looking directly into her eyes, I have to ask, how can I not? You did what I've been too afraid to do. You tried to escape. You just went about it the wrong way. The mystery of his reaction was unraveling, and underneath was something neither of them expected. Grace. But here's where it gets really beautiful, and maybe a little heartbreaking. The Duke sat down next to her, close but not touching. Here's what I realized in the months we've been together. The woman I fell in love with, the one who laughs at terrible jokes, who argues with me about literature, who gets genuinely excited about stupid things. That woman is real, isn't she? Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. That's not Lady Ashford. That's you. The real you slipped through your lies like sunlight through curtains. He smiled sadly. I didn't fall in love with your supposed nobility or your fake family history. I fell in love with Eleanor. Just Eleanor. The problem is, you didn't think just Eleanor was enough. The weight of that statement hit her like a physical blow. He was right. The entire conspiracy had been based on her belief that her authentic self wasn't worthy of love, wasn't enough to deserve him. She'd created Lady Ashford because she couldn't imagine that plain Eleanor, poor, common, ordinary, could ever be loved by someone like him. But he'd loved her anyway, loved the parts of her that were real, the pieces that slipped through the performance. You're saying—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't dare to hope. "I'm saying that I'm hurt. Yes. I'm angry that you didn't trust me with the truth. But I also understand why you didn't. Because I haven't trusted anyone with my truth either." He finally reached out, took her hand hesitantly. "We're both trapped in identities that don't fit. Maybe we could help each other escape." The moment crystallized into something profound. Two people, stripped of their pretenses, seeing each other clearly for the first time. The Duke with his forbidden love of music, Eleanor with her common origins, both believing they had to hide to be loved. "I don't know if we can come back from this," he said honestly. "The trust is broken, and that's not something we can fix overnight. But maybe—" he squeezed her hand, "maybe we can build something new, something real, where I'm not just a duke and you're not just whatever story you're telling, where we're just two flawed people trying to figure out who we actually are." The disappearance of their false selves was painful, but underneath was something raw and genuine and maybe, just maybe, worth fighting for. Because the truth, as messy and ugly as it can be, is the only foundation strong enough to build real love on. So, what's the real lesson hiding in this mess of lies and confessions? It's this: we're all terrified of being seen, not looked at. Seen. There's a massive difference. Eleanor and the Duke both had people looking at them every day, but nobody actually saw them. The merchant's daughter was invisible beneath her poverty. The Duke was invisible beneath his title. Both believed that their authentic selves weren't enough, so they built walls. Hers were made of lies, his were made of duty and silence. But walls that keep rejection out also keep love from getting in. That's the trap we don't talk about. Every mask you wear to protect yourself becomes a barrier to the connection you're actually craving. It's like wearing armor to a swimming pool. Sure, you're protected, but you're also drowning. Here's what kills me about their story, and about most of our stories, if we're honest. We spend so much energy trying to be what we think others want that we forget to be what we actually are. Eleanor studied etiquette and noble families, memorized lies, performed perfection. The Duke suppressed his passion, buried his music, played the role written for him. And for what? In the end, what drew them together were the unguarded moments, the accidental truths, the cracks in their facades, the laughter that slipped out before she could make it refined, the way his eyes lit up when discussing art before he remembered to look bored. Those traces of authenticity were what created real connection. Everything else was just noise, just performance, just emptiness dressed up as substance. I've watched this pattern repeat in my own life and in countless others. We curate ourselves like museum exhibits, showing only the impressive parts, hiding anything that might make us seem weak or flawed or ordinary. Social media has made it worse, but the impulse is ancient. We all want to be loved, but we're terrified that our real selves aren't lovable enough. So we offer up edited versions and wonder why we feel lonely even when surrounded by people. It's like those shipwrecked sailors the Duke mentioned. Two people wrecked on the same island, but each hiding in separate caves, convinced they're alone. The irony is brutal. The connection we're desperate for exists right there, on the other side of vulnerability. But we're too scared to reach for it. Let me get practical here, because abstract wisdom is useless if you can't apply it. How do you start being more authentic? Start small. Really small. Next time someone asks, "How are you?" and you're not fine, try saying, "Honestly, I'm struggling a bit." Watch what happens. Most of the time, they'll open up too. Share something you're embarrassed about. A failure, a fear, something that makes you human rather than perfect. I started doing this a few years ago, stopped pretending I had everything figured out, and you know what? The relationships that survived that honesty became deeper, realer, worth keeping. The ones that didn't survive weren't real anyway. Like Eleanor discovered, you can't lose something you never actually had. The love aimed at your mask isn't yours. It's aimed at a ghost. The hidden cost of inauthenticity isn't just the stress of maintaining lies. It's the slow erosion of your sense of self. When you perform long enough, you forget what's real. Eleanor reached a point where she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Lady Ashford or Eleanor, the merchant's daughter. The Duke had been playing his role so long, he'd almost forgotten he loved music. That's what happens when we prioritize being accepted over being known. We disappear into our own performances, become strangers to ourselves, lose touch with what we actually want and feel and need. It's like method acting that never ends. Eventually, you can't find your way back to the person you were before the role started. But here's the beautiful, terrifying truth that Eleanor and the Duke discovered. Vulnerability is the only path to real connection. Not vulnerability as a performance, not carefully curated authentic posts or strategic sharing, but real, messy, unpolished honesty. The kind that makes you shake, that might cost you something, that offers no guarantee of a good outcome. When Eleanor finally confessed, she had no idea if he'd forgive her or destroy her. That's real vulnerability. Risk without a safety net. And when the Duke shared his secret about his music, he was trusting her with the part of himself he'd hidden from everyone. That mutual exposure, that simultaneous nakedness of soul, created something their months of careful interaction never could. Actual intimacy. Think about the masks you're wearing right now. What are you hiding because you think it's not good enough? What parts of yourself have you locked away because you're convinced nobody would love them? Maybe it's your background, like Eleanor. Maybe it's your dreams, like the Duke. Maybe it's your struggles, your quirks, your fears, your failures. Whatever it is, those hidden pieces are probably the most interesting things about you. They're certainly the most human. The perfectly curated version of yourself you present to the world? That's boring. Everyone's doing that. The real you, flawed, weird, struggling, dreaming, that's what's worth knowing. That's what creates connection. That's what deserves love. The revelation at the heart of their story isn't that lies are bad. We all know that. It's that authenticity is terrifying but necessary. You can't be truly loved without being truly known, and you can't be truly known while hiding behind masks. Eleanor and the Duke got a second chance because they finally risked the truth. They stripped away the performances and said, "This is who I actually am. Take it or leave it." That's the gamble we all have to make if we want real connection. Will some people leave? Absolutely. Will it be painful? Probably. But the alternative, being surrounded by people who love a version of you that doesn't exist, is a lonelier fate than solitude. Because at least when you're alone, you're not lying about it. The conflict between protection and connection is one we all face. But here's what I've learned. Masks protect you from rejection, but they also guarantee you'll never be fully accepted. And being fully accepted as your imperfect self? That's worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability. That's the whole point of being human. So here's the question that should be burning in your mind right now. What masks are you wearing? No, seriously. Stop and think about it. What parts of yourself have you locked away because you're convinced they're not good enough? What lies are you telling? Not with words necessarily, but with the version of yourself you present to the world. Because here's what Eleanor and the Duke's story should have taught you. Every single day you spend hiding is a day you're not actually living. You're performing, you're managing, you're controlling, but you're not living. And the love, the connection, the acceptance you're desperately craving, it's on the other side of the very vulnerability you're running from. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Would you rather be admired for someone you're not, or truly loved for who you are? Because you can't have both. Eleanor learned this the hard way. Spent months being adored as Lady Ashford, while the real Eleanor was invisible, unloved, non-existent. The irony is brutal. We hide to protect ourselves from rejection, but in doing so, we guarantee that we'll never be truly accepted. Think about that. Really sit with it. You're working so hard to be safe that you've made real connection impossible. How's that working out for you? Are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Or are you exhausted from maintaining a performance that nobody even asked for? Here's your homework, and I'm serious about this. Identify one thing you've been hiding and share it with someone you trust this week. Just one. Not your deepest, darkest secret. Start small. Maybe it's admitting you're struggling when someone asks how you are. Maybe it's sharing a failure instead of another highlight reel. Maybe it's telling someone about a dream you've been too scared to voice because it might sound stupid. Whatever it is, take off one small piece of your mask and see what happens. I'm willing to bet the reaction you get won't be rejection. It'll be relief. Relief from the other person who's also been pretending, who's also been hiding, who's also been waiting for someone to be real first. And here's the bigger challenge. What would your life look like if you stopped performing? If you let people see your mess, your struggles, your authentic weird self? Would you lose some people? Probably. Would it be scary? Absolutely. But would you finally breathe? Would you finally sleep at night without the weight of maintained lies crushing your chest? Would you finally experience what it feels like to be loved for who you actually are instead of who you're pretending to be? Because that's what this whole story is about. Two people trapped in prisons of their own making, finally finding freedom through terrifying honesty. You have that same choice. Every single day, you're choosing between safety and truth, between acceptance and authenticity, between being admired and being known. So what's it gonna be? Are you going to keep building walls and wondering why you feel alone? Keep curating a perfect image and wondering why nothing feels real? Keep lying about who you are and wondering why love feels hollow? Or are you finally ready to risk the truth? Because here's what nobody tells you. The people worth having in your life will love you more for your honesty, not less. The relationships worth keeping will deepen with vulnerability, not shatter. And the you that exists underneath all those masks, that version is so much more interesting, more lovable, more worthy than the edited version you've been selling. Eleanor discovered that. The Duke discovered that. Now it's your turn. Don't let this be just another story you consumed and forgot. Let it be the moment you decided to stop hiding. Start small. Start today. Start with one honest conversation. And if you want to keep learning about how to build real connections, how to stop performing and start living, how to find the courage to be authentically you, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because we're just getting started unpacking the lies we tell ourselves and the truths that set us free. Drop a comment below. What's one mask you're ready to take off? What's one truth you've been too scared to share? Let's build a community of people brave enough to be real. Your move. What are you gonna do with it?